We'll return to this mammoth meeting of the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee and welcome Nigel Smith, who has joined us for this item. So I'll now ask the relevant officer. I don't know whether you're taking it, Nigel, or whether you're taking it, Caris. Caris will take it. So I'll now ask Caris, the Chief Officer for Finance, Performance and Change, to present a brief executive summary of this report.
Okay, thank you very much, Chair. So the purpose of this report is to present to this committee the draft capital strategy for the period 2023-2024 through to 2032-2033. The draft strategy includes the potential indicators against which the Council will measure itself during the financial year. And committee is asked to provide any comments for consideration in the finalisation of this strategy for presentation to Cabinet and Council in February and March. So members will be aware that the control of capital expenditure is regulated by legislation, and the regulations provide a framework for accounting practices to be followed and also contain detailed provisions for the capital finance and accounting controls, including the rules on the use of capital receipts and what may be treated as capital expenditure. In addition, we are required to determine a capital strategy which demonstrates that the authority takes capital expenditure and investment decisions in line with service objectives and properly takes account of stewardship, value for money, prudence, sustainability and affordability when making these decisions. So the proposed capital strategy for the period I've already outlined is attached for you at Appendix A of the report. It outlines for you how we managed risks within the capital programme, and it's expected that a feasibility study is completed to determine whether a scheme can be delivered before the Council invests time and money into that project. And to be included in the capital programme, the Council needs to understand how successful the project will be, what will be delivered and at what cost, how it will be funded, and what potential risks may be inherent within that project. We've already rehearsed with members that there are a number of pressures within our capital programme, including inflation, which is impacting on the costs of schemes, also supply chain difficulties, and issues about recruiting to posts, whether that's within the Council or external, to actually deliver these schemes. And you'll also be aware that we regularly report through to Cabinet and to Council on the progress of the capital programme, outlining any issues within that programme and any changes that we therefore need to make. So the 10-year rolling programme, which has initially been set for 2023-2024 and onwards, and it puts an indicative allocation in for the following 9 years. This information is draft and it will be updated when the Council's budgets are finalised for the medium-term financial strategy, which, as I say, is going to Council at the beginning of March. So if I may, Chair, I would just take you to Section 9 of the report and the recommendations, which are that the Corporate Overview and Scrutiny Committee note the draft capital strategy for the period 2023-2024 to 2032-2033, including the prudential indicators for the next 3 years and the associated schedules, and provide any comments for consideration in finalising this strategy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Caris. I know Councillor Penhale-Thomas wanted to ask a question on the cover report, but he's had to leave the meeting, like many of our colleagues, so I'll ask it on his behalf. He would just like for you to consider a member briefing to enhance members' understanding and a sort of baseline awareness of what the capital strategy is. So I think potentially that could be a useful exercise, especially given the fact that we've got such a significant number of new members. So perhaps you can think about that during an appropriate time in your calendar. That's all he wanted to ask.
Could I just check, Chair? Would you want that before this strategy goes through into Council?
I don't think necessarily. I don't think he mentioned a timescale for it. I think it was just a general comment on ensuring that members have a detailed understanding of the capital strategy. Councillor Amanda Williams, please.
I think it might be beneficial though, because obviously if we're all looking at it, we want to have a bit of an understanding. I've got a few questions, but I don't think they're really appropriate for this meeting now. Having rethought about my questions, I think they could be picked up in a member briefing, because I think it's more about my understanding rather than specific questions on the report.
Okay, what's the timescale there, Caris, of being able to incorporate that member briefing before this needs to go to Cabinet and Council? It's probably a bit tight again, is it? Does this need to go before the February meeting of Cabinet?
In my calendar, we got a Treasury Management training on Friday the 10th of February. But is that been firmed or not?
So that's
provisional,
no, that is confirmed. That's for next Friday, but that is specifically Treasury Management. So this is obviously, you know, with Treasury Management indicators, this is, and you know, investments, loans, etc. This is more. I mean, they are interlinked. There's no getting away from that. But obviously, this covers different elements in terms of linkages to the capital programme, different types of funding for capital, that kind of thing. So different indicators, prudential indicators for capital. So whilst there are linkages, I think it's a bit too late to change that one to bring them both together. And it might be a bit too much information. So, but in terms of the report goes to Cabinet on the 22nd, the same as the MTFS, and then obviously to Council on the 1st of March. So there's not an awful lot of time to pull anything new together specifically before Council, I'm afraid.
No, especially when you've got to do the number crunching on all of the different budget reduction proposals which just Scrutiny have provided. So I'm not sure whether that's possible, Councillor Williams. So I would encourage you to ask the questions now to ensure that they're reflected in the Cabinet report, and then potentially have a member briefing thereafter to encompass what Councillor Penhale-Thomas was aiming to achieve to enhance member understanding of the capital finance strategy. So are you content with that? Can you come in with your other questions? I know they were on Appendix A, weren't they, page 63?
So, do you want to go to Councillor Martin Hughes first while I pull up that page?
Yeah, of course.
My questions.
Of course, Councillor Hughes, welcome to come in.
Yes, thanks, Chair. I was going to ask, it's probably a question for Nigel, possibly. It's about the option of leasing rather than borrowing. So on page 75, I understand from the report that there's going to be some further investigation and a review into how feasible leasing is. So there's obviously work that's got to be done, but I just wondered what the initial views were about this being a feasible option.
Thank you very much. Who can take that? One for Nigel or one for... Yep. One for Nigel, I think. Welcome, Nigel. Sorry to keep you waiting.
Hi, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Chair. Thank you for the question. Just sorry, quickly flick into the page 75. Okay, what that is actually referring to is a change in the accounting standards. All our accounts have to be put together following the CIPFA Code of Practice on Local Authority Accounting, which brings in sort of accounting standards that we have to apply. There is a change in terms of how we will need to account for leases moving forward. Historically, they've kind of been dealt with as a revenue cost, but in many cases we may, for example, lease a building, and we may have done that for a number of years. The new standard will require us to recognise that as a right of use asset on the balance sheet rather than just a cost through revenue through the income and expenditure. And equally, then we'll have to recognise an opposite liability loan in effect. So it's more about the accounting, how we account for the leases, rather than us considering leases as an alternative.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. Councillor Hughes, are you content with the response? Would you like to come back in again?
No, thanks, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hughes. Councillor Granville.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just say, going forward, perhaps that is a good idea, what Councillor Hughes has said about leasing vehicles and lorries, for the simple reason is we don't pay for tyres, brakes, anything mechanically wrong with these machines, we don't pay for. It goes back to the company for them to do, and they supply another one. So it'd be well worth, perhaps, Councillor Spanswick looking at that for the long term.
Is that a legitimate suggestion, Nigel?
Sorry, the slight delay. My mic seems to take a second. I think it's something to consider, but I just think that members need to be mindful that by bringing leasing onto the balance sheet, we are effectively then going to be increasing our borrowing and debt liabilities. So it's something to be mindful of, but something that could be considered moving forward.
Thank you, Nigel. I'll bring Councillor Granville in again.
Yeah, just to come back on that, we're not actually then purchasing the lorries or cars or vans outright. We're hiring them, so we can claim that VAT back through the council, right? So it's a win-win, I would have thought, on that.
Yeah, Councillor Williams would like to come in.
We'll get Fleet Services to look at that suggestion by Councillor Grenfell.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. If anyone didn't catch that, we'll get Fleet Services to look at that suggestion from Councillor Granville, and we'll get a written response circulated to the committee. Councillor Williams.
Before I go on to my question, this just shows my confusion when it comes to capital and revenue, because I thought leasing was revenue, not capital, and purchasing the equipment was capital, which is why I think it'd be beneficial, because if I might be the only one who's thinking that, and somebody else might be thinking, everyone else might know and understand this more, but that was just my point on that. But I have got my question again, which I would have raised as had we had a member briefing, and that was to do with risk. Like you said, it was on page 63. And when we look at risk, and it's always risk, financial risk to projects being delayed, increased costs and everything. And it looks here, we're looking at strategic, economic, financial, commercial and management cases. But I've got a background, for anyone who doesn't know, in risk and claims and incidents, accidents and all of that. And I know in the past we've discussed it in Governance and Audit Committee, and we've looked at that element of risk. And that's where my confusion is, so where that element, because when we're talking about corporate, if somebody has an accident in one of our buildings or related to one of our structures or something, where does that fall under this plan and any funding that comes out as a result of anything from an injury from this, from one of our capital projects, please?
Thanks, Councillor Williams. Cass, are you happy to take that, or Nigel? Who's best?
I was just going to make a general comment, because you raised risk there, Councillor Williams, that when we do assess the projects, it's not just about financial risk, it's also about deliverability and whether or not actually the proposed scheme or whatever it is will actually deliver what it is that we want it to deliver. So we do take into account service issues. Yes, we take into account money, but also more importantly, really, the outcome. So what's the outcome of that expenditure, and are we actually going to be able to meet that outcome by the proposal that's being put forward?
Thanks, Caris. You content with that, Councillor Williams?
Well, it answers part of it, but it doesn't answer the whole element risk when you're looking at injury, because health and safety is touched on briefly in this report. There's a small paragraph, and it's where that element as well of risk falls into this corporate plan. And that's where maybe in a member's briefing, I could have had a few, back to and fro and to better understand if it's in there. If it is, where? If it's not, why it isn't?
Caris?
To try and answer that one for you, I mean, obviously we have insurance cover. Depending on the level of injury or money that needs to be paid, we will either pay that via the revenue account, or we do have an insurance fund to meet those costs. But they don't go through our capital account. I suppose that's the clear thing on this. That's not a capital cost, if that helps.
Thanks, Caris. Councillor Howell-Williams, please.
Yeah, I think Councillor Amanda Williams, it may be confusing health and safety risk. So if they involve our employees, then we have an obligation as an authority to risk assess and provide that health and safety overall assessment. Some of these capital projects may be sort of outsourced to an external company, and then they would share that health and safety risk there. This is more about the financial risk and the deliverability risk. As Caris has said, no, will this project deliver the outcomes that we want it to deliver? And so the health and safety side is a slightly different risk than to what's highlighted in the report. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks for your contribution, Councillor Williams. Councillor Amanda Williams, you happy?
Yeah, that's what I was trying to establish, because obviously, whilst I've got a background in law and claims and risk, and that was my question, is sometimes, whilst we have insurance companies who deal with things, if we identified a flaw in one of our buildings that involved additional building requirements, and a classic example is schools, when we've had a review of some of the car parks, and the health and safety executive have come out and they've demanded changes to those areas. Where is that fund covered in here? Because that is a financial risk if we are providing, because a lot of our buildings are public buildings, and sometimes the requirement is a change to that building or the layout or the plans. And it was not so much of, because I know insurance companies deal with the personal injury, it is more the capital spend that we have to put into these premises to remove that risk, that physical risk.
Thanks very much, Councillor Williams. Deb, you best place to answer this?
I don't know that I'm best placed, but I'll have a go. No, so in terms of any additional capital type works that need doing to a building, that would go through the capital programme. So, and that would obviously be funded from capital resources, be that capital receipts and earmark reserve. So that would enhance the value of the asset. It may be that the works required aren't of a capital nature, so they're not enhancing the asset, and they would be funded through revenue works. So it depends on what works are required and what's been assessed as being needed, whether it's capital or revenue. Then any costs associated with any incidents arising from that, then, as Carrie said, they would fall through the insurance funding side, which is a revenue cost and not a capital cost. So there's lots of they all fit together somehow, but obviously it depends on what the nature of the works are required and on what funding source they come from. So sorry, it's a bit confusing, but that's just the whole nature of local authority funding, I think.
Thanks, Deb. There's a bit of feedback in the chamber. I don't know whether everyone's got their microphones turned off, unless it's just my ears. Thought there was, but thank you very much for that answer, Deb. Councillor Williams, do you have anything further to add on this point?
No, thanks.
Great. Thank you very much for your contribution. Councillor Bledsoe.
Thank you, Chair. Just very quickly on the continued theme of risk. It's well noted that obviously there's been issues with Thurrock Council, and I just wondered, as a consequence of that, have we made any adjustments to the way that we interlend to councils? Is there any sort of risk assessment being done on that? And if so, what are the changes that have come about as a consequence, please? And could I ask Caris, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bledsoe. Caris?
We did take a draft Treasury Management Strategy through Governance and Audit Committee last week, actually, which dealt with that issue. And very mindful of the comments that we've had from members during the current financial year, there is a proposal to change our investment policy, if you like, with regards to how much we will lend to local authorities and the time period over which we will do it. So the proposal is that it drops from £12 million per local authority to 10, and also that the period is limited to 2 million. Is limited to 2 years. Sorry.
It's dropping down from how many years?
To 1 year.
Sorry, it's dropping from 2 to 1 year. Yeah. And we've done that really on the basis of legitimate issues that have been raised here with regards to that particular policy.
Thank you, Caris. You satisfied with that reply?
Thank you, I am, yes. And it's heartening to hear that that's been taken into account as well. That's lovely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any other comments on the capital strategy 2023 and 24? Otherwise, we will reserve any further comments to the member briefing, which will be coordinated in the near future. No. Okay. I will therefore take members to the recommendations, and that is to agree to note the capital strategy 23-24. Someone prepared to move? Thank you. Councillor Granville, seconded by somebody. Thank you. If anyone had 3 o'clock in the sweep about when this is going to end, you've lost. But if anyone had 4 o'clock, you might be in with a chance. Right, so we discussed item 6 earlier on because members had to leave. We now move to item 7, and that's the conclusions and recommendations. I will now ask the scrutiny officer to summarise 6 hours of meetings and on the committee's conclusions and recommendations. Jessica. You're more than happy to stay, but no, you're more than happy to stay. But I can, if you are invitees and you'd like to leave, you're more than welcome to do so. And I thank you for all your hard work and contributions today. Thank you very much. We'll just wait for the invitees to leave, members, and then I'll hand over to Jessica to take us through the conclusions and recommendations. Okay. Item 7 then, conclusions and recommendations. Jessica will take us through those.
Thank you, Chair. So if I can take members back to the beginning of the meeting when we were looking at the Q3 revenue forecast, there was obviously quite some detailed questions, answers and discussion regarding the report. So I'll try not to rehearse too much of it in any great detail. Suffice to say, at the beginning, or towards the beginning of that report, there was some discussion regarding the level of council tax and the level of proposed council tax, regarding collection rates and the uptake of the council tax assistance scheme. And members will have heard from cabinet members and officers that there hadn't been identified any significant uptake in that scheme, and that if collection rates did fall, then that the rate would need to be looked at. There's also discussions regarding the free car parking and whether that had brought footfall back to towns, and officers provided a detailed response with regards to that and grants that were put in place to support businesses and new businesses, particularly in Bridgend. Chair, then I think you asked a question when we moved on to the Education Directorate about savings that had been identified in supplies and services and what that actually entailed. Lindsay gave a brief answer but confirmed that he was happy to write to the committee in more detail as to what that actually did then entail. Excuse me. And then sticking with the Education Directorate, Councillor Penhale Thomas queried with regards to commercial places on home to school transport. And Lindsay, again, he gave a comprehensive answer in this respect as to why that was not possible. But whether Councillor Penhill Thomas, well, I appreciate it's not in the meeting, but whether the committee wanted to make a recommendation and put their weight behind making, his point was, I beg your pardon, there were a growing number of parents willing to pay and were frustrated that they couldn't do so, so whether the committee wanted to lend any weight to discussions with new providers regarding that. When we were to the Social Services Directorate, Councillor Bledsoe raised that the £15 million pressure was not new and unforeseen, or perhaps was not unforeseen, and asked whether she could see the risk register in that respect, and whether the committee would like that to come back. Chair, as well, you mentioned that the Social Services Directorate had provided the percentage of budget variances in the adult social care sector, but hadn't provided the children's social care sector. So whether the committee wanted to request that further information. And finally, in respect of the lengthy discussions about the volatility of pay and price inflation and demand on services, the chief executive mentioned the graph of doom, and you underlined the recommendations that have already been endorsed by this committee that all national legislative commitments need to be fully funded. So just whether there are any further comments or recommendations in relation to the Q3 report.
Thanks, Jessica. Are there any other recommendations or are the committee content to endorse those recommendations, and we'll seek further clarification in writing on the issues which the corporate directors have offered to provide? I'll take no response as an endorsement of that. Okay, move on then to item 4 then, Jessica.
Certainly. So we moved on then to the corporate plan. And members raised that they might be helpful within the infographics or graphics within the plan, if it would be more useful to identify a per day or per household or per person representation of the funding and the spend. Alex Rowling confirmed that she could do a mock of a sort of each representation for the committee to have an input as to which one they preferred. There was some discussion about the value of shown per household, specifically in relation to waste collection. There was some discussion, I think, from myself, Chair, in respect of KPIs and whether they should be coupled with objectives and key results. And the Chief confirmed that there is an annual action plan which will provide that detail. It was reiterated to the committee the timescales involved, as the council is obliged to have the corporate plan in place by the 1st of April, and it's going to Cabinet and Council in March. There was finally some discussion regarding the 5 ways of working and whether the committee wanted to make any recommendations in respect of the infographics representation of that. And finally, the discussion was regarding the responsibilities of the public and residents themselves towards maintaining their own health and well-being.
Thank you for that summary. I don't know how you capture all of this, Jess, but you're doing a better job than I could ever do. Does anyone have any comments, or you're happy to endorse those observations and recommendations?
Happy.
Rachel would like to come in now.
Thank you, Chair. Just one point I was raising, whether the Cabinet member raised, and I wondered whether any members had any comments. He was looking for some views, really, and some suggestions as to really how they could get this information out there. You know, the committee commented how some of the infographics and the information in the corporate plan was really, really useful. You know, we published the corporate plan and it goes on our website, but it's really, as you said, about getting the message out there. So I wonder whether there are any suggestions from any members about how we do this we could put forward, possibly.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. Councillor Williams first.
I think it was in response to when I said about communication and how this really sums up in one page where our money's being spent. There's no report. You don't have to go through everything. It's quite clear for the public so they can understand what services we provide. And I think as a rollout, it might be that obviously social media is one, that it's a nice, bright, we've seen the colours. I know it's going to be amended. The colours will probably change and it's going to be done professionally. But I think social media is one way and we can certainly share that. But obviously we need to also make sure that it's available and it's usable for the older members of our community too, because it looks very digital now. So we also need to remember that there are people who are not computer literate. There are people who have got eyesight problems, and would something small on an A4 page be appropriate for all? So I think we need to look at different ways of sharing this, and it's a difficult task, but we need to make sure that nobody's forgotten.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Perhaps we can ensure that Alex is aware of those observations and to ensure that we have a communication strategy around the overall corporate plan as well. Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Williams. We go to Councillor Walter now.
Thanks, Chair. I'm wondering if the timing would allow us to send the infographic out with council tax demands, which will be going out in a few weeks' time, which might, notwithstanding what Councillor Williams has said about eyesight issues, but it might help assist those that are not on social media. Just a suggestion. Thanks.
I think if the infographics can be put together, that's fine, but I'm not sure whether they can be. I think Alex said that there wasn't an internal team to do that, so but we can certainly ask the question, Councillor Walter, no problem. Councillor Bledsoe.
Thank you. I was just going to offer to have a meeting with the Cabinet member and with Alex about this, to offer any suggestions there if they wished, because I've obviously done this in the past with communications, so I'm happy to do that.
There we go, using member skills, fantastic. Perhaps we can pass that on to Alex and Councillor Good, and I'm sure it'll be accepted with open arms. Are there any other comments? Councillor Granville.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened to in content there. Perhaps we should use community councils a bit more as well, because we've got websites, right? We're in the community, and what we could do is put a couple of them copies in community centres and libraries so people can pick them up as well. You know, like Bridgend Town Council, you know, they've got a vast area, you know what I mean, by stake. So I think we should be utilising that more.
Yeah, using community councillors and using members who are at the very heart of their communities is a really good suggestion. So I hope you've captured that and we can pass that on to Alex and the Cabinet member. Thank you, Councillor Granville. Are there any other comments on item 4, recommendations and conclusions? No, on that basis, I think everyone's content with those amendments, or those additions rather. We will now move to what do you want to move to? Capital strategy. We'll do it in the right order this time rather than reverse it. So item 5, capital strategy.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, on the capital strategy, you raised Councillor Penhale-Thomas's question that he would have raised, which was that he would welcome a baseline briefing for members to assist with members' understanding, and during the meeting, I think the consensus amongst members was that they would welcome that. In addition, there was a query with regarding looking at leasing cars and machinery to look at avoiding the cost of maintenance of those items when things go wrong. And the Cabinet member confirmed that they will get Fleet Services to look at that and provide a written response to the committee in respect of that. I think that was everything captured there, unless any members had any other queries or requests.
Thank you, Jessica. You mentioned the member briefing, didn't you? So I think you've included everything from my recollection. Does anyone have anything to add? No, so I'll take silence as an endorsement of those conclusions and recommendations. And then we move to item 6, and that was the scrutiny recommendations on the MTFS and draft budget consultation. I think we endorsed that we would send all of the recommendations without amendment from Corporate Overview Scrutiny Committee and all scrutiny committees to the Cabinet for consideration after some debate. But I don't know whether you've picked out anything else which needs to be added. Jessica?
Thank you, Chair. Come back to the committee endorsing the comments and recommendations. One thing that did arise from discussions during the discussion on this item was whether there should be some communications put out with regards to earmarked reserves and what they're used for and the purpose of them. So whether the committee would make that as a recommendation in addition to the recommendations themselves from previous committees.
I think that was a useful suggestion, just to communicate to the public exactly what their money's spent on. I think no one would argue that would be a useful suggestion to recommend. So yeah, please do include that in our recommendations. Are there any other matters which you'd like to bring to our attention?
Yes, Chair, the only thing we were going to ask is with regards to the comments and recommendations that have been endorsed from BREP, COSC and the subject committees. There have been some duplications and some that have been superseded. So just whether members were content for us to take out any duplications, obviously so we just have one list of recommendations that Cabinet will respond to.
I would move that we consolidate the recommendations into a report so there's no duplication. Is someone happy to second that?
Second.
Yeah,
Second.
Thank you. Second, thirded and fourth. Right. Okay. Thank you. Is that all? That's all then. Okay. We now move to item 8, and that's urgent items. There are no urgent items of business in respect of which notice has been given in accordance with Part 4, Paragraph 4 of the Council Procedure Rules. And I thank you for your attendance at this very lengthy meeting. And I hope you have a good rest of the day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.